Welcome to Marchese Daily, where we talk all about some sociocultural, political, and psychological analyses to better serve you for examples and frameworks for your life such that they are mobilizable to getting your eyes on the prize and finding your fulfillment. For today's topic, we are going to talk about this broad theme of the right-wing self-esteem and degeneracy problem. And the Epstein Sperging and the Sarah Stock scandal will function as an example for why this thesis holds, or why this is a problem, or how this becomes a problem. And it most certainly won't be for the reasons that you might think. A surface level analysis will procure this, Tradcath is like dumb, and women are whores, so that means we have to put women in a milking farm. It's time to grow up with that stuff. And no, I don't mean that because I'm femtarded, but I mean that simply as, obviously, like, imprisoning and berating women hasn't worked. If it did work, we wouldn't have a rise or a button pushed in women that is feminism, meaning that them becoming what they become in the modern day, that wouldn't have happened had they known or felt the value of living the way they did previously. So it's sort of like when you have a child and you give them the consequences, but that doesn't always make them value the thing in and of itself. No recess if you didn't do your homework, but they just only understand that as a consequence rather than an actual intrinsic valuation of homework and what it'll procure for them later on in their life. So, with that said, remember to like, subscribe, retweet Marchese Max. Get me on all socials. I'm mainly on Twitter. That's my main forum there, but of course I gotta grow everywhere else to include Substack or Soystack, YouTube, Rumble, and I'll also be finding ways to post to the other microblogging platforms too, like Threads and Gab, and I'll be posting to Instagram too. Slowly but surely, I will get myself together here. Marchese Daily, more like Marchese sometimes, right? So the lazy med carries on. I see I have my frame set up well here. The Marchese method sign there. I had to lower it a little bit, so the command strips are a little off there. So that is that part. Okay, MarcheseMethods.com for one-on-one coaching and or based therapy. I have pretty good fucking prices there. Okay, guys? You guys are all bitch moaning all day and you want help, so here it fucking is for like $30 an hour. You can't fucking beat it. Every other life coach who's going to tell you this same tired and insipid stuff about how to be a pickup artist or something will, that's all boring. That's not a sub, by the way, at my friends who do operate in the PUA space, that type of thing. I'm just thinking of all these huge names that are charging thousands upon thousands of dollars for an hour long of coaching, something that you kind of can Google, essentially. Whereas all my friends that are coaches and PUAs and everything, your relationship and your camaraderie with them will inevitably procure you remarkable results. So let me stop blabbering there as a intro and let me get started. So I think when I saw the Sarah Stock problem, although it is chronologically after the Epstein problem, I think it warrants a question of what does it really mean to be right-wing anymore? And this has been an ongoing argument of there's the right and then there's the real right, which is a dialectic between the conservatard Fox News libtards who you might have seen a meme before where it's like conservatives in 2040 and it's, oh, I don't mind if the immigrants come here, just don't pay for first class, don't make the taxpayer pay for first class, right? This sort of thing. Oh, I don't mind if immigrants come here legally. That's where it's at right now. But I think there is another problem of right-wing identity. And you might have seen me write about this in the Trump Cope Derangement Syndrome article I put together, which I'll also make into a video form. So let me reiterate it. So if you've read it, you'll hear this again. It's always good to keep exercising, nevertheless, even if it feels repetitive. So And that is, I'm going to tell you the story how I became loosely right wing, and then I developed my sense of politics, values, morality, even arrived at Christ, and my story there, and how the problem of the right wing is nobody has the groundwork, intrinsic valuation of things like discipline, congruence, transcendence. And what does that mean? I think mainly men will know this story or understand what I'm talking about here, and that is that all of us feel in our adolescence a latent mandate to be a man, to man up. And all of us also feel that the usual insipid bullshit about what it means to be a man isn't quite landing it. And that entails stuff like being a sports ball faggot, being cool at skateboarding or dude broing or any of these things. We can all feel that the most grounded first step mandate of masculinity is congruence. And what congruence means is you have a resilience emotionally, physically, spiritually to be able to exercise and enact your values or be a better person or grow or work out or something to the detriment of your feelings, impulses, pleasures, neurotransmitters. We can all feel, as men and women too, but it plays a different role for our sense of self, but nevertheless, it's there, it's present for both. And in fact, that women haven't learned this is actually one of the major problems, one of my major theses. But focusing on men here, we can all feel what a bitch we are, essentially, what it feels like. It feels like being a bitch. It feels like being a pussy if you allow your brain signals, neurotransmitters to tell you or make you do something. It feels like you're not an alpha leader if you are listening to your neurotransmitters instead of listening to yourself and your conscience. And for me, this started with the gym thing. From 14 to 17, I half-assed and everything. I had my epic breakup bro thing sophomore year of high school, and one of the elements to that to sort of regain a sense of masculinity, because you sort of feel like you lose it sometimes in those breakups because of how much it evokes emotion in you and how much that woman had your emotions. So we try to regain it in many ways. And one of the ways is to get serious about the gym. Because the gym, what that is that exercise in masculinity, in sovereignty, in agency. When you go to the gym, despite not feeling like it, despite it not being pleasant, despite it being uncomfortable, you have developed masculine sovereignty, congruence, agency, and you are able to tell your neurotransmitters what to do rather than your neurotransmitters telling you what to do. You are in charge of you in your life. Your brain signals and your fucking pituitary gland or whatever aren't. You, your soul, your identity, if you're a secular fag, whatever, your frontal lobe, whatever version of this you want to call it. Now that's where it starts for me, and that's where the right wing starts. That's where you have to, if you don't develop that in any meaningful way, really resting in the gym above all else, because that is the most direct contact with that dichotomy between your neurotransmitters and your soul, you're never going to be right wing. So I understood this and I developed that. And I also developed that in particular because I knew that if I didn't have that congruence, people would see right through me. And what does that entail? That entails powerlessness, weakness in front of other people. You're unable to exercise your will. People aren't going to take you seriously, and you're not going to be able to navigate life. Now, it's not really about that, because that's sort of a cope, that's sort of utilitarian, and that's still sort of pussified subordination to the opinions of others. But nevertheless, if people can see through you and see weakness through you, you're not going to be able to leverage your surroundings or leverage your relationships. So that's where that starts. And you could tell that's where that starts because we were all in high school or something, and we all viscerally felt disgust and anathema for left-wing bullshit and left-winginess, because what is left-wingness? Left-wing liberalism is subordination to those feelings. And many of us remember our first debates essentially amounting to that. They axiomatically subordinate to their feelings, and you axiomatically don't. And that is why they want things like, oh, minimum wage this, and taxes that, and the frickin' heckin' capitalist this and that. And so you can feel and you can see, even if you didn't know how to word it yet, that they were coping. They were excusing themselves from working, from metabolic effort in any way, from cognitive effort even. You could tell that they were a bunch of fucking pussies. And so we all knew, and we all know that that is what they are, and we all understand that there is a deep flaw in valuation of that, because there's just more to life than that. There's more to life than your neurotransmitters. There's more to life than comfort and pleasantries and all of this. Whether you like it or not, and this is why they go insane, because they're coping and seething so much, but they are so neglectful of their soul, so neglectful of that need, of that want, of that identity, of their superego, that they develop this deep hatred for themselves, and then they go insane in all these ways. And then once that hatred is excavated by something like your presence or Donald Trump, invoking discomfort, but more importantly, invoking the discomfort of seeing what it's like to withstand discomfort, both interpersonally and individually, it makes them freak out. It makes them Sperg. So that is where our right-wing values and all of that starts. Discipline, valuing transcendence, and valuing being above your neurotransmitters, feelings, impulses, etc. So now, what is a problem? A problem arises where we all sort of feel that, and it feels really good to get started on that. Oh yeah, I'm going to go to the gym. We feel motivated. That's another element too, right? There's a difference between feeling motivated and just being motivated by the love and affection and valuation of the gym in and of itself. You feel motivated. It's a new thing you're trying out. You're learning. You're getting some kind of novelty stimulus. But then a problem arises. And that problem is it's actually not that fucking fun. We all valued rejecting our neurotransmitters, rejecting our pleasures and pleasantries, and upon first exposure to that idea, it might feel good. You might feel like you're going to be a tough guy. You might feel motivated. The edits play and this sort of thing. And then you arrive at what it actually takes. And what does it take? It is quote unquote proverbially boring, but boring here means you're not getting dopamine from it. Now, there's arguments about dopamine from the gym or whatever. Removing that. If it was so dopaminergic, everyone would work out. It wouldn't be a fucking problem, right? So obviously, it's a little bit more complex than that. There's delayed gratification if there is a dopamine element. And so it's harder than it fucking seems, essentially. You have to go to the gym. It has to be uncomfortable. It takes 3 years to get fucking big. Or at least it took me 3 years to become categorically big. You're not eating the pleasant kumi foods. You are reading instead of watching fucking Hitler edits. You are trying to make your mind challenged by learning math or whatever. And so it's much fucking harder than it seems, and it's not so exciting anymore. It's not so novelty stimulating anymore, and you don't feel all that tough yet, because there's either always somebody farther along that journey, or there's always the problem of your feelings nagging at you and you sometimes subordinating to them. So here is a foundational element to basically every ensuing pathology with something like this, and that is that now when you have your tripartite personality, superego, ego, and id, your superego is telling you to do these disciplinary things and transcend and be above your neurotransmitters. And your id is telling you to indulge in your neurotransmitters. Now, that indulgent feeling is very strong because it is what made us survive for thousands of years. Long story short, Our brains incentivize our survival by invoking feelings, good or bad, when they are pursuant to our survival or detrimental to our survival. Now, these feelings are a problem because they didn't evolve to anticipate abundance or surplus. And we are in surplus right now of everything. Therefore, simply with the food example, your brain rewards you, so you keep eating, but you keep eating without metabolic effort to get that food. What a meal that took 2 weeks to hunt down thousands of years ago takes 2 minutes of not even walking if you don't want to. But the feeling, the stimulus doesn't account for that. So essentially, it feels like you're going to die if you subject yourself to discipline, suffering, discomfort, your goals, value system, and everything. But simultaneously, if you do indulge in those neurotransmitters, you feel guilty. You feel guilty because we have an element of ourselves, that is our soul and our identity, that operates outside of the confines of human instincts and biology. And that's what happens for these dorks, rightoid dorks. Rightoid dorks now feel like they've reached at an impasse where it's much harder than it seems, so we have suddenly this remarkable capability to rationalize. And so what does the rationalization entail? Well, it says, instead of doing the things I'm supposed to do, instead of working out or being disciplined or investing in a long-term goal like getting big and it takes 3 years or so, I'm going to rationalize the standards, or I'm going to rationalize that I actually am tough, sovereign, insubordinate to my feelings right here and right now. And what does the right wing do? The right wing provides that perfect ameliorate for that. Namely, the right wing, just identifying with the right wing amidst the collective unconscious of people, places you in the category of these tough guys. Regardless of what you actually do, you can feel, people start to feel this sensation that so long as they categorically identify with the right wing, vote right wing, MAGA this, I voted for this, that, freaking heckin', tough guy economics, they get to be a tough guy without having to do anything tough. Because is it fucking hard to call yourself a MAGA Republican? Is it hard to spout the quips and the easy fucking bullshit little tweet lines about the right wing? About being pro-white wing? Right wing? It's easy. That's not fucking hard. It's not hard to fucking... And then what does it entail further? Because you feel that way, because that axiom is feeling like you're tough, simultaneously feelings come and go. So what do they have to do? These dorks have to keep doing things, or doing easy, quippy, bullshit little dopamine spiking things that make them feel good and make them feel tough and make them feel like they're right wing. So they'll do the memes, they'll do the gay little this and 10 million deportations, and they'll do the fucking potty words online, and they'll say how cool it is that JD Vance says potty words online. And that makes them feel tough because, oh, look at me. I'm disagreeable. I'm against the subordination to the mammal-brained codes and ethics and shame tactics. That's another one, too. They learn about all these ways that they could rationalize that they're so tough. Like that gay little study about how, higher testosterone men are disagreeable. So what do? They disagree with everything. As a linear, commensurate expression of masculinity and testosterone. The more disagreeable, the more testosterone. The more testosterone, the tougher I am. The tougher I am, the more I necessarily do not subordinate to my feelings. The more I necessarily do not subordinate to my feelings, the less guilty I should feel. The less guilty I should feel, the better I can, prance around with my fucking head held high, and the more I can confidently assert to myself that I don't have to do anything fucking tough, challenging, disciplined, and so on. Moreover, they'll also use that as a way to get fucking their precious pee-pee pets from women More testosterone equals more pee-pee pets. More pee-pee pets from women necessarily means more masculine. More masculine means more tough. More tough means I'm in control of my feelings. More in control of my feelings, the more everything I do necessarily think and say is a consequence of aligning myself with my superego. Therefore, I don't have to feel guilty. Therefore, I can sit around and fucking jerk off and not feel guilty about it and actually convince myself what a tough guy I am for it. And there's many versions of this. There's many lines of cope theology. Just parasocial identification with Trump. The Venezuela thing. Oh, parasocial identification with military toughness. That must mean I'm tough. Oh, that I don't have compassion ethics must mean that I'm absent feelings, which must mean I'm tough, which must mean I'm not guilty of subordinating to my feelings. So you can see how all of these pathological lines develop. This culminates in something like Sarah Stock and Jeffrey Epstein, wherein it's not even so much that Sarah Stock was a right-wing trad thought or anything like that, that inevitably, although she is using that pathological line. So people, but women in particular, have this problem of they're really anxious about being transcendent and they feel envious of men who are transcendent. One of the frameworks by which people try to be transcendent is to be Christian, because Christianity is all about rejecting the desires of the flesh and being above that and doing what's right and this sort of thing. But similar to right-wing categorical identification, people will categorically identify themselves as Christian. It might even do a fairly good job of playing tough guy and everything like that. But then when Christianity asks them to do something like not fucking have gay butt sex at gay butt sex TPUSA parties, well, now that one's a little bit harder to align themselves with. And inevitably, because they didn't value the intrinsic discipline from the start in and of itself, value transcendence itself, and try to align themselves with transcendence, but rather cope rationalize that they're categorically transcendent by way of a label outside of themselves, especially one as strong as Christianity, because it's 2,000 years old, it's sophisticated, it's theological, it has thousands and thousands of scriptures and literary backing, such that they can feel like they are categorically tough and transcendent and all of that. But because they didn't value it, they didn't feel it in their heart and their soul in and of itself, you have these inconsistencies, like having a gay fucking butt sex affair with each other at their gay butt sex getting drunk parties. The alcohol is one of those too. If you're truly transcendent, you don't care to make yourself feel good with your feelsy goodsy sippy juice. So Sarah Stock most certainly is the example of this, but more complicatedly, dorks online are deploying another pathology. That pathology is that they will linearly distance themselves from an inconsistency to make themselves feel like they're linearly and more categorically tough, transcendent, whatever. And so when they spurg out, and this is how they make themselves feel this way, spurging out about Sarah Stock and what a whore she is and this sort of thing provides them that opportunity. Particularly, the more they feel it or tell themselves they feel outraged by this or mad about this or something like that, the more they say, oh, that's so disgusting. I would never do that. Excuse me. The more that must mean that they are more aligned. Why? Because, well, if they feel that strongly that way, that must mean their emotions have strongly incentivized them to behave better than that. Therefore, they must be behaving better than that. Therefore, their guilt be gone again. Now, isn't that interesting that the thesis there is that if one feels strongly about something, they're more inclined to do it or not do it. So isn't it remarkable that still deeply embedded in there is subordination to feelings? A lot of these dorks are still subordinate to their feelings. They argue from feelings all the time. Oh, well, Venezuela to deter China because it feels like that would deter China. when obviously it fucking doesn't. How is that going to deter China when we are China's bitch because we rely on them totally on manufacturing? So you see how this goes. It feels like it would be deterrent because in hunter-gatherer individualistic tribalism, it feels like to do something like that would scare somebody off. It would scare me, therefore it scares somebody else. So there it is. Spurging out about Sarah Stock is saying, well, I'm outraged by that because I feel very strongly that that's wrong. And I feel very strongly that that's wrong because I very strongly feel what's right. And if I feel very strongly what's right, I must be acting right. And if I'm acting right, I don't have to be guilty and I don't have to worry that I'm not putting forth enough metabolic, physical, or cognitive effort. Moreover, there is another element of pathology that Sarah Stock is just the total fucking salivatory circumstance for, and that is this dorkery amidst the manosphere type stuff, wherein we have to advance the conversation about dating and everything because faggot, pussy little idiots are cowardly, doing everything they can to avoid intimacy with women. They simultaneously feel a star in the constellation of fulfillment, happiness, and joy is relationship to woman. In particular, a relationship to a woman that is satisfactorily intimate, deep, spiritual, and so on. Now, what does that entail? That entails opening yourself up to vulnerability and opening yourself up to emotional risk. Now, when you're a low self-esteem and you're not aligning yourself and you're not confident because you're not disciplined and you're not transcendent, you presume that a woman would leave you any chance she gets and she would think you're a pussy and this sort of thing and try to take advantage of you and everything. So with that prior, these dorks are doing everything they can and coming up with every rationalized excuse to avoid intimacy there again. Redefining the standards, redefining the wants and the needs such that they are excused from solving the women problem. And instead, playing this game of getting sexuality from them as a masculinity conferral. Furthermore, again, in the absence of masculinity, discipline, transcendence, and the felt sovereignty over their impulses and feelings. So, with Sarah Stock being the proverbial, ostensible woman you're supposed to trust not to betray you, and the woman you're supposed to see as capable of relating to you honestly and committing to you and this sort of thing. That she did this just provides them with every fucking delicious excuse for them to say, see, look, even the trad girl is a cheating whore. Therefore, I'm excused from ever being vulnerable to women in any way and relating to women in any way because, look, even the best of them, the supposed best of them, is a cheating whore, fickle, and untrustworthy, and juvenile. Therefore, I am perfectly excused from trying to meet that need despite it gnawing at my fucking soul that I'm doing nothing to meet that need or want. And I will just keep spamming this rationalization whenever I feel guilty or whenever I feel lonely or something like that. And I will continue to resolve as an excuse for Kumi, feelsy goodsy as well, to just engage in endless, fickle, promiscuous sexuality with women. Furthermore, presuming that the need from women, too, is conferral of masculinity and just sexuality in and of itself. Pee-pee pets. You can pet your own pee-pee if that's really, truly the actual need in and of itself, but it obviously isn't. So, this masqueraded masculinity, this masqueraded right-wing stuff, this desperate, juvenile, ridiculous, cope rationalization of everything from parasocial identification with the right wing Trump, categorizing yourself as right wing or Christian or something like that, fundamentally is the problem that erodes and degrades the right wing in every possible way. Especially because it makes you a fucking goy who votes for Trump and everything like that, because you are still so subordinate to feelings that the only intel for you that's relevant to any political decision is whether it makes you feel good or bad. Hence, when Trump says potty words or when he says tough guy shit that makes you feel like a tough guy, you resolve to vote for him when he actually does no meaningful political, enacts no meaningful policy that advances your agenda or anyone's agenda for that matter, except for like Israel and corporate tax cuts or whatever. So that is the Sarah Stock element. Now, similarly, let me just check my notes here. Yeah, I guess as a postscript here, there's an element of further, whether it's just subordination to sexuality or this cope rationalization of valuing sexuality as conferral of, you know, physiognomy value or whatever, or sexual value, is still fundamentally libtarded, pussified, hedonistic, subordinate to hunter-gatherer instincts. If your value system is whatever has utility for sexual reproduction and survival, you're just as much of a fucking bitch, coon-brain goy as libtards, as women, as whoever you consider an inimical dork, pussy, whatever. You know, this like right-wing cope has somehow amounted to like, yeah, it's actually based and masculine to like smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, and like fuck girls. No, it actually isn't, because none of these things entail anything resembling discipline, emotional resilience, sovereignty, transcendence, leadership, personal intrinsic development. It's all just feeling fucking good and subordinating masculinity and intrinsic value to women's arbitration. So, now similarly, this for Epstein Sperging, the preconditions are similar. In particular, amongst men, men feel themselves as immoral, feel guilty, feel like a pussy, feel emasculated by their subordination to their impulses and feelings. And so, similar to this outrage feeling thing, the more I feel that something is wrong, the more I must be righteous. They spurg out about Epstein. Epstein and the whole pedophile hunting thing overall. Dorks will utter their little tweets, get in the wood chipper, and they'll feel like they did something. They'll tell themselves they did something. They'll tell themselves they did something that was a challenge to themselves. None of that is challenging insofar as you're just fucking uttering things. You're just emotionally masturbating by pretending to freak out. And you're not even challenging any mammal-brained fitting in. You're not even taking a stand against the group and withstanding the ensuing or subsequent shame, guilt, conflict, confrontation. So men do this with the Epstein Sperging, and they figure it's if you linearly express greater emotionality, and if you linearly express it as playing this like safe bet thing of like what's any version of under 18 is necessarily, dude, I don't give a fucking fuck, that's fucking pedophilia and this sort of thing. Like, most dorks don't even know that most states the age of consent is 17, and then there are a number of countries in Europe where the age of consent is 16. And so what you have is the same priors and the same way to make oneself feel moral, above, powerful, masculine. It's also a delicious part too for them because they get to LARP feral masculine protectorate. And when they do this, they're essentially saying, well, I'm so masculine that I'm like a feral raging freak protective of the hecking kids. And then like the SpongeBob, when he's got his bathing suit on, he's like, well, I'm cool. And he's like, they look over at the women nearby, hoping, pursuant to castration anxiety, they've activated like linearly commensurate female feral sexuality. Oh, look, I'm doing the protectorate thing. You want to fuck me now, right? I've signaled that I protect children. You want to fuck me now, right? Have sex with me now, right? Please. Now, women always pick up on what an act that is, but these idiots still think, because they're using rationalism instead of understanding what attraction is, which is felt. They spam this over and over again to make themselves feel like they're a man and they're attractive and they're getting laid and all of this, when realistically none of that is actually happening. Now, let's investigate why this even arises, the Epstein thing or pedophile whatever thing that is, because in libtarded society and individualized and atomized society, inevitably sexuality is going to emerge as a behavior in need of regulation. And that in need of regulation mainly reduces to ensuring that people who are vulnerable aren't taken advantage of. Now, people who are under 18 are fairly vulnerable emotionally, intellectually, experientially. And so we had to set a line somewhere at the very least. So sure, 18, 17, whatever. Now, the problem is that human sexuality doesn't operate on a binary like that, on a category like that, and it's not felt like a category. So meaning that people develop secondary sex characteristics throughout their teenage years. Now, everyone everywhere can, for the most part, tell that somebody who is 13 or 14 is 13 or 14 or 15, 16, sometimes even 2. But sometimes a 16, 17, 18-year-old looks like they are of age. Now, this doesn't justify it in any way or anything like that, but that is to say that human sexuality operates on a continuum, not a category, not a binary, not on a discrete or discretionary. Now, in the way our society is set up, we have to draw the line somewhere. So sure, draw it at 18, that's a fairly safe bet. But to preoccupy yourself with this stuff pursuant to your own self-esteem cope rejects and fundamentally falls for the limited hangout of the Epstein propaganda or the Epstein files and everything like that, which is trying to say that the greatest problem and consequence is that it was a freaking heckin' evil pedophile satanic ring rather than a blackmail ring for the highest level politicians and influential people in our society on behalf of another country. That is the more consequential problem. And we have to bring up the pedophilia, or rather that he used 16, 17-year-olds, which is categorically not pedophilia because pedophilia is prepubescence. We have to bring up that part because those people, 16, 17, young girls or whatever, sometimes look like they're 18, 19, even 20. Most of the time you could still tell, but sometimes people can't. Because secondary sex characteristics develop on a continuum, and our brains tell us that that person is capable of reproduction. Doesn't make it right. You could say it's illegal. You could say it's distasteful. You could say it is a bit creepy. Fine, fair enough. It is a little strange to be 40, 50 years old and eyeing up even 18 to 20-something-year-olds. There's an emotional difference. There's a intellectual difference. There's a wisdom difference. And the societal thing that we consider anathema is taking advantage of vulnerability. So there's this presumption that somewhere in there, someone is taking advantage of vulnerability. Now, of course, since we have to draw the line somewhere, that means past that line, we can't really be coping about that. Maybe that does happen a little bit, maybe it doesn't. But nevertheless, that it is about vulnerability brings up this problem of confusion because the law is put in place to protect vulnerable people. But the problem is that vulnerability operates on a continuum as well, which means that a 16, 17-year-old is for the most part just as emotionally, intellectually, spiritually vulnerable as a 19, 20, 21, even 22-year-old. Some people actually remain emotionally vulnerable their whole lives because they're fucking babies and idiots and normgroids and juvenile. Some people grow up very fast and are very emotionally resilient and aren't very emotionally vulnerable. And that's not a tacit thing there to say, oh, well, sometimes you can figure out that a 16-year-old is emotionally invulnerable. Therefore, it's okay then. Relax. That's not what that is. But that is to say, because emotional vulnerability operates on a continuum, that category of 18 years old makes us freak out still anyway. And that's where you have women in particular sparking out about older men, just age gaps overall. Now, we've made the jokes before of like, oh, you know, how is it that women are so much smarter, cooler, stronger, whatever than men, but simultaneously totally helpless to them if they're just merely 5 to 10 years older than them. So we've made those jokes before, but in particular, women spurg out about this. And before I forget, this is also another element to men. Just overall sexual strategy sometimes amounts to flattery by alignment with women. So they will align themselves with this women spurging out about this stuff as ethics, in addition to the feral masculinity protectorate trying to activate female sexuality. But in particular, now that society is ruled by women in the collective unconscious, in the emotional nebula of interpersonal socialization and everything like that, we have that women had a button in them pushed by globo, homo, communism, and everything. And that button is that indulgence to feelings, but also in particular, indulgence to their comfort overall by everyone else. And so they all came together in the collective unconscious and agreed not to shame each other and things like that. But what is their problem? In addition to their latent felt physical vulnerability, they also feel an emotional vulnerability overall to men because they're so weakened and subordinate to their id and their feelings, neurotransmitters, and everything. But simultaneously observing that men, on average, are linearly more transcendent than them and more capable of surpassing and suppressing and sequestering those impulses and feelings. So when they come across that, they find men extremely threatening in that way because that tells them that they're choosing not to be ideal. They're choosing to be pussified. They're choosing to be weak. And that they have the choice erodes and degrades their entire construct and schema, a schematic excuse for being subordinate to their feelings and the like. Furthermore, this problem particularly affects women to a much stronger degree because they evolved circuitry to prioritize feelings a little bit more than men. Simply put, because of the physical differential, they don't have the time to evaluate risk and things like that and do these computations and compute the risk of later and greater gratification and everything. They have developed it somewhat. They had to have, obviously, but for the most part, they're more sensitive to those survivalistic feelings such that for them, it's just whatever's uncomfortable, they're avoiding it at all costs. So they feel this difference and they feel men being transcendent, which makes them feel guilty. So this amounts to any version of any power differential between them and men further makes them freak out. When you are that vulnerable, it activates fear circuitry that may not even be rational, but it doesn't even matter. just as a nature of how the brain evolved a feelings computation of risk, categorical risk. It doesn't matter that we live in society and like we're civilized and we don't have men just like fucking freaking out and being total animals and capturing and doing things to women. It doesn't matter that our brain's ancient firmware can't feel that, can't really detect that, and doesn't care to. As a matter of fact, it developed this like risk neuroticism wherein it's better to just mitigate risk to non-zero than to place risk at 1-2% or whatever, because death is very final. It has this finality to it. It has this categorical finality to it, wherein if you're placing yourself within that risk, you know, it becomes like this felt calculation of like, well, who the fuck, like I can figure that out another way, because if I'm risking death, well, then I'm fucking dead, so it doesn't matter. So when your brain feels vulnerable, it only considers itself in fight or flight or in death. And so vulnerability is also felt not just as physical, but emotional, as general feelings. And so they feel particularly vulnerable amongst men because of the physicality, but also because of that transcendence difference. It threatens them by invoking guilt. And guilt, as a negative feeling, reads the same way as pain. As pain that indicates you're closer to death. So, Epstein and anything related to age gap relationships and this sort of thing makes women freak out because of that. It is a neurotic, irrationally felt vulnerability that they can't shake, and they won't shake because they don't want to, because that would entail disciplining themselves. You don't feel that vulnerable when you are transcendent, disciplined, sovereign, and everything like that. And even just some general false rationalizations of age necessarily implies greater accumulation of power, resources, whatever. It most certainly correlates, but it doesn't always provide that. Most people remain juvenile fucking babies their whole life, actually. And so Epstein Sperging is men subordinating to women, trying to LARP like a tough guy, feral masculine protectorate, trying to activate female sexuality by aligning with them, flattering them by aligning with them to open up vulnerability. They're doing it as a moral posture to keep themselves from feeling guilty for not doing anything fucking challenging or anything righteous or anything moral. The Sarah Stock operation is a similar thing, spamming what a whore she is and everything like that to avoid intimacy, as an excuse to avoid intimacy with women, and as a moral posture of, oh, I don't do that, I'm linearly feeling more disgusted by that, which must mean I'm necessarily linearly farther on the righteous, to the right of her, or people like that on the righteous spectrum. Women feel this latent vulnerability that is both physical and emotional, wherein they are subordinate to their id more so than men, and they consequently feel guilty, ashamed, hate themselves, and everything like that. And in the presence of more transcendent men, they find that threatening insofar as it activates guilt, which is felt to the brain as putting you in fight or flight. So the Epstein stuff, the age gap relationships, makes them freak out about it. And everyone is doing this. And then similarly, Sarah Stock and even women in particular try to ameliorate this by identifying themselves as categorically Christian. But when you don't feel any of this discipline, transcendence, evaluation precipitously in and of itself, I've always said to people, the gym thing isn't about health, isn't about the consequences of the gym, isn't about getting laid or whatever. It is about that you made yourself go to the gym that day, irrespective of how you felt. That is the Yield. That is the goal. That is the resource you're trying to get. Training yourself to be above that, to be more aligned with who you want to be righteous, to be sovereign. And all of this is the political implications is that if everyone everywhere is so subordinate to their feelings, they're going to be fucking goy that are going to be ruled. The Epstein Sperging stuff is making for people to forget about the part where it was a fucking blackmail operation. Blackmailing our elite politicians and our elites overall. Why was blackmail needed? Because that is a way to get politicians to enact policy, advocate for policy, whatever, against the actual interests of that politician or his or her representatives, or the country in and of itself, which means that the blackmailer was an operative on behalf of, in other cases, a special interest, in this case, another fucking country, making the United States a vassal of Israel. Obviously, this makes for circumstances wherein Israel will make the United States do something that is beneficial to Israel but detrimental to the United States. Like fucking war in Iran. So the solution here, or the prescription here, is grow up past your feelings. You really have to learn how to be past your feelings, impulses, and everything. You have no choice. Like the gym and everything, even these health faggots, alternative health faggots, you've seen me rip into these people because that's another cope rationalization. Oh, this is healthy. Healthy means sexual, and sexual means valuable, and means I'm jacked or masculine or something like that. Therefore, I'm tough and powerful. Therefore, I'm meeting my needs. Therefore, I don't have to feel guilty. Therefore, I'm a tough guy and above my impulses and feelings. You can't rely on your feelings for literally anything anymore. Like, realistically, and some people might question, what about good feelings, this sort of thing? What about authenticity and this sort of thing? I've always said it like this. Happiness is peace. Happiness is you're not coon brain pleased and you're not, detrimentally displeased. And it's not even something in the middle. It is essentially peace. It is contact with love and affection for sovereignty, intrinsic affection for your friends and your spouse, intrinsic affection just for some things. I love reading. I've picked up reading. I love the gym. I love learning. I love truth. I love math. I love exercising my skills. I love counseling, mental health counseling. My friends or anybody, clients, I love these things regardless of the metabolic effort that they force me into. I love these things regardless of the discomfort. You have nothing better to do. You've watched the gay movies 1,000 times. You've eaten the fucking raw meat, the raw steak, the based milk 1,000 times. It's not doing anything for you. There's so much to fucking do and so many cool things to know and learn about. And with that, you will actually manage to be a serious political agent insofar as your vote is going to mean something, and the actions you take and the influence you have is going to force accountability amongst politicians, amongst elites, and so on. Because they can't just spike your dopamine receptors to get you to vote for them anymore. And inevitably, just do some introspection. You're miserable like this. You're miserable spurging out about Epstein. You're miserable coping about Sarah Stock. You're miserable because you're not a jacked, sexed up freak beast. You're miserable having to spam copes. So, in short, I think that amounts to my phrase, as always, Marchese Methods, is eyes on the prize. Get your eyes on the prize. Think about how whatever's going on for you right here, right now, politically, socially, or whatever, ask yourself, is what I'm trying fucking working? You don't even have to understand why or how it's not working. Just simply, now is the time to actually use your feelings a bit. Do I feel like I'm there? Does it seem like I'm at peace? Am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Am I doing what I want to do? Am I loving every day? If the answer to that is no, and you have your eyes on the prize, you will resolve to take action and do something about it, regardless of the metabolic effort. And ultimately, when you operate this way, you will find your fulfillment. So, those are my thoughts on Epstein, Sperging, and Sarah Stock. Maybe I can do one of these once a week or something like that. I place tremendous pressure on myself to give you something a little bit more intrinsic, something you haven't heard before, something more analytical, sophisticated than contemptible, trite nonsense, repeated platitudes. But if anything, it's cathartic for me to just exercise some of my thoughts here, even with this minute quantity of notes here. So if you found this compelling and you think I can help you for coaching or based therapy, I am in training to be a mental health counselor, which means that I operate for now as a life coach, but I deploy everything I know about mental health counseling, and that will be a life coaching operation, or based therapy as I call it, because that's not a legally protected label and everything. But I deploy everything I know. I've done this for many years of my life without any inclination for it as professional. This was just something that I intrinsically felt a calling to, that I've done for many people, for many bros. Many bros have felt themselves really come to fulfillment, happiness, joy, confidence, masculinity amidst my guidance and all that. So if you found what I said here compelling, interesting, or something of the like, it might help you out. MarcheseMethods.com for one-on-one coaching or base therapy. $50 for 1 hour session. $120 for 4 sessions, hour-long sessions up front. There's the Marchese Methods hoodie on my website. I'll actually show it to you here. It was a little too hot to wear it. But here it is. Marchese Methods hoodie is available on my website, marchesemethods.com. That's what it looks like. And it's kind of a conversation starter, actually. I've been wearing it at my gym, and some people have just asked me, like, what's that? I'm like, yeah, it's the based therapy. That is me, because I'm the based therapist. You can also go to email me or DM me for my Discord. $5 a month, you get unlimited texting help from me all day, every day. And sometimes that even amounts to a voice message because I can't help myself. But just help people and give what I can to you. So that's that. Epstein, Sperging, Sarah Stock, the right wing, self-esteem, and discipline problem. MarcheseMethods.com for coaching-based therapy. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.